lot of scrimmages around the SEC yesterday. We dug and dug and dug and got as much scoop and intel and whispers as we possibly could. Hey, I think this offense at Alabama is going to be pretty nasty. Now, I've been hesitant on this. I know Kalen DeBoer's track record. I know Jalen Milroe bordered on being a Heisman finalist last year. I know they landed one of the top receivers in the country. But, man, it's a lot of transition. So I've been careful. I've been really careful. I've talked to people there. I've been there. We went there. We were there during spring. Yeah, I saw it. I've been hesitant. The more and more feedback we get from Alabama this fall, the more and more, or the less and less hesitant I am to think, hey, they're going to be pretty nasty on offense. And not only do you have guys like Jeremy Bernard, that wide receiver they brought from Washington, who I assumed would be their wide receiver one. I still believe he'll be their wide receiver one. But this thing with Ryan Williams is real now. Ryan Williams moved ahead of grade in high school. Ryan Williams came there as a five-star receiver when he should be a senior in high school. And I'm not talking about early enrollee. I mean an entire year ahead should be a senior in high school. Came there in the 160s, got him up to about 175 right now. And every time we've talked to someone down there, it's Ryan Williams is showing out. Ryan Williams is going to challenge for playing time. And so I had been of the opinion that they'll work him into the rotation. I still think they'll work him into the rotation. It just may be long before conference play when he's featured in the offense. Too good to keep off the field is what we keep getting told. Caleb Odom is another guy that was brought in and listed as a tight end and probably could do either or in that offense. But I'll tell you one thing that I think doesn't need to be overlooked that we keep hearing out of Alabama, quarterback depth is really good there. To the point where I had someone tell me, hey, Milroe's our guy. Make no mistake, Milroe's our guy. But if we had to go to war with Ty Simpson, we'd be able to win with Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson's still just there. Do you remember that? He's just there. And they brought in Austin Mack from Washington, and they got Lonergan, and maybe Mack's the future, but you never know what happens, especially with the style of play Jalen Milroe has. You never know what happens. So they feel good about their quarterback depth, wide receiver depth. They feel good about secondary. Continues to be the question. Not that I heard terrible things about it this week, but secondary, if they get that piece figured out, if those young guys can be counted on, and look, there's a reason. They lost Nick Saban and are still one of the top 5 teams in the odds to win the whole thing. Out at Texas, just after we did the show the other night, they confirmed that C.J. Baxter was out with an injury. And so that's a former 5-star running back. In fact, let me tell you this. I'll just do the A&M thing now, because Reuben Owens has been lost for the year as well. So Baxter and Owens were the 2 5-star running backs 2 cycles ago. One is at Texas, one's at Texas A&M. Both of them within the span of a week, out for the year with injury. So we'll tell you about the Texas piece right here, because there's a lot still to like about this team. This right here, losing C.J. Baxter at 6'1", 220. I'm going to tell you where that probably bites them the most. You lose an ultra-talented guy. He was all Big 12 honorable mention last year. But also in the short yardage situation, this is where the devil's in the details. This is where you can't just look at a starting 22 and how many 5-stars and 4-stars are there. It's the matchup situation. It's the 3rd and 4th down in short situation. Last 2 years for Texas, they've been 90th and 63rd in power success rate, which is 3rd, 4th down, 2 yards or fewer to get. Short yardage, just bulldoze your way ahead by any means necessary. Your season comes down to converting like 8 to 12 of those plays. Texas has been bad at it, and then they were average at it last year. And absent C.J. Baxter, they don't have other guys there. They're not without players. They don't have other guys they could just blindly lean on to convert those. Ewers is probably the guy. Quarterback keep is probably the move there right now. Now, there's a lot of good juice on defense. So their defense has shined, at least in the first scrimmage. And remember, their pass D was 116th last year nationally. Safety sounds like it looks a lot better out there. Defensive line, as far as we can tell, has been pretty good against the run so far. Now, that's the first scrimmage. No offense dominates in the first scrimmage. But let's just pay attention to the short yardage situation. And number 2, let's see if we hear the same thing about run defense out of the next scrimmage as we did this last one. At Oklahoma, shocker, defense dominating. Now, back in spring, I made a statement on the show that got a lot of pushback over on our Oklahoma board. I don't think it's getting much pushback anymore. I said Jackson Arnold still suffered with turnovers in the spring. Well, that wasn't me guessing. He suffered with turnovers still in the spring. And it's still kind of sort of a problem here. It's not uncorrectable. It's nothing like that, but it is still an issue they're working through. It was an issue in their scrimmage Friday. So I think, some people who thought all that's just magically cleaned up because 2 months go by without football were a little bit kidding themselves. So Jackson Arnold still got a ton of potential. This is something that has to be cleaned up, which is a phrase I hate, but it has to be cleaned up before they start playing meaningful games. Keep in mind, okay, this offensive line's still a question, and that's before you start talking about the depth of the offensive line. But this defense is the other thing that you need to be paying attention to. Because this defense, stylistically, number one, has the kind of players they need. Number two, if Brent Venables is my head coach, that should be my hallmark. I shouldn't be looking over here, even though it would be nice to score 45 a game. I shouldn't need that, and they won't need that. Their defensive line could be and should be the strength of this team. They got good players on all three levels here. I think Stutzman had a pick six, I think, in their scrimmage Friday. So Oklahoma, still very, very much a team figuring itself out. Their over-under win total 7.5 because that schedule is pretty tough. You got turnover issues, though. You saw what happened to Clemson last year. You got turnover issues. That greatly hamstrings you no matter how much of a recruiting and talent roster advantage you have on the opposition. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on there. Auburn, feel a whole lot better now than I did this time last year or in the last several years about their defensive line depth and their ability to rotate guys in, which of course affects how you can practice. They are able to mix and match a whole lot more there. Now, they had sort of an open scrimmage, as I understand it, where media could watch and fans watched, so you're not really doing much offensively in terms of play calling. But you do get to at least watch personnel and folks who have been around Auburn a long time saying, yeah, this looks a lot different. And there are more than just 3 or 4 guys we can rotate in, 7, 8, 9 bodies that look like they're SEC ready to play up front defensively. There's still, I think Auburn strikes me as a team that's still figuring out how they're going to have to win games. Now, you've got a situation where Hugh Freeze, and if they keep recruiting like they are, you know how they're going to win next year, year after that, or at least if they have it their way. You know what a Hugh Freeze team looks like when they've got their players. But they don't have their players yet, fully. They got some of them, and they're all really young. So this is the kind of team that's good enough on the lines of scrimmage, just good enough at quarterback. They got some young firepower at receiver. They're the kind of team that could go win a bunch of games 19-13 and 23-19, and you've got to fight and scratch and claw, and you got to squeeze the sponge until every drop of water comes out of it, and magically you found 8 or 9 wins. That's got to be Auburn football this year. Anything above and beyond that is a pleasant and big surprise. But they can't crater. That's what they can't do. They can't afford injury at the quarterback position. No one else there is ready. And we can argue to what degree Peyton Thorne's ready, but you know what you got in Thorne. The rest of those guys, they don't have another SEC-ready quarterback there right now. So figure out how to win games. Think it's still fair to call that a work in progress there. But there's hope. There is hope. Florida. Hearing really good things about Jacoby Jackson at running back. Now, remember, Etienne transferred to Georgia, and then they lost Montrell Johnson, who was their number 1 running back, for a few weeks, not out for the year, at least it doesn't look like, but they're going to be without him early on. They're without him right now. Trayon Webb and also Jacoby Jackson are 2 of the reasons why people didn't freak out down there. And we were down there in spring, and that was what they were saying even then. Like, we're okay. We got some good depth. We got dependable depth at the running back position. Now, that's good news. The other bit of good news is Graham Mertz is back. They didn't even, as far as I can tell, use him a whole lot in the scrimmage because they kind of know what they have with him. They wanted to work Lagway in. They wanted to see what else they had. What they have is an offensive line still very much trying to figure itself out by the looks and sounds of things. And this is one of those situations where if I were playing 2 or 3 tune-ups before I played any real competition, I'd just say we'll figure it out in week 1, 2, 3. They may face the best pass rush they see all year in week 1. So if you're still figuring out offensive line and figuring out how to protect your quarterback, you're playing the absolute wrong team in week 1 to be doing that against in Miami. So I really need to hear better things in scrimmage number 2 than we heard so far about Florida's offensive line. Now, DJ Lagway did get some reps, huge upside. Would shock me if they didn't find ways to use him this year because there is talent and there's a skill set there that is so unique it can't be ignored, and you can't just have that on your sideline because you're probably leaving points on the sideline if you do that. What about Georgia? So Georgia, Dan Jackson making a really, really good push for that second corner spot, which is something we talked about last week. Georgia, just because they have questions on a depth chart doesn't mean they have weaknesses on a depth chart. Quite the opposite. They just got a lot of really, really talented former 4- and 5-star guys fighting over spots. But what was funny, I was over on Dogs 24/7 earlier reading some of the practice reports, and they were listing all the guys that were out in the scrimmage. They had a lot of guys they kept out of this thing. Sometimes that's for legit injury. Sometimes it's because a guy's banged up and we don't want to risk it. But one of the posters over there made a really good point. And they said, the list of guys we kept out of this scrimmage could probably win the Big 12. Like, this list of guys could probably compete in some other conferences out there. And they're not wrong. Lots of depth at the edge position, defensive end. There's a lot of questions about the internal defensive lineup and just how effective they can be, and can they push the pocket, and can they stop the run and all that. Yeah, okay. So it's a complimentary game. So if you're C+ somewhere, be A- somewhere else, or better. Gabe Harris is yet another name that just randomly flashes, just randomly pops, and you're like, oh man, I forgot Georgia has him. There's a lot of depth, a lot of talented guys that they could rotate in, and maybe that's how Georgia gets it done. Maybe that's what they become known for this year up front. I will say this, though. I'll continue to stand by this. There are 2 schools of thought on Georgia out there. There's a thought that there's Georgia and a gap between the other good teams in this country, and I don't think that's the case. I'm of the other school of thought. I got Georgia power rated as my number 1 team coming into this year. I think there's some teams, 2, 3, 4, that are very comparable to them. Not roster to roster, apples to apples, but if I put them on a neutral field, it's not Georgia -7. It's not Georgia -9. I don't think we start this year, at least I don't, with the default setting that is above and beyond. It's not even close. Georgia than the field. It's nothing like that. And I don't think people close to the team are suggesting that. I've seen the further away you get from the team, I've seen some people say that. So maybe that's the way it pans out. That's not the way I see it to start the season.